My name is Bart Stump, and talk is just scraping by privacy implications of mining the internet and kind of digging through and seeing what we all leave out there. So we'll start. Who am I? A lot of you may know me, a lot of you may not. I am a father of twin boys, 13-year-old boys. We get outside a lot. Have a new puppy through the pandemic who didn't get one. I'm also one of two black hat knock leads with Grifter. You guys may know that guy. DEFCON goon, involved with DC 801 and 801 labs. Been MIA a little bit the last year or two, but that'll get back into it. And then senior security consultant for Optiv by day. So again, the internet and privacy, and what we're going to talk about and what that looks like. How often do we think that we have any semblance of privacy on the internet? Oftentimes, a lot of people think that they do, and just the people that I've talked to. But I think in most cases, the assumption should be that there is no such thing as privacy on the internet. That data's out there. Again, having 13-year-old twin boys, it's very apt for me at the moment. Trying to make sure that they're aware of the implications of what they may say as a teenager on social media and the internet as they become adults, and we'll talk about that a little bit. Again, in some cases, I believe some people have a false sense of security or privacy, based on certain sites that they're at. They didn't do anything wrong. You've heard those terms all before. Again, we need to assume that that data also exists forever. So again, if you put it on the internet, you say something that you didn't necessarily mean or was in the heat of the moment, can certainly come back to bite you. And we've got some apt examples that I want to talk about a little bit before we kind of get into what the project is that I'm looking at. A few of you may have heard in the news recently, don't know if you're sports people, but John Gruden is the head coach of the Oakland Raiders. Well, I guess it's Las Vegas Raiders now. They've been, we'll let that reset. They have been doing some investigations on another NFL team based on some issues that were there, and they were digging through emails to find implications of workplace. Let's get this started back up now that reset. There we go. So workplace misconduct with what was the Washington Redskins, Washington football team. Digging through those emails, they found emails from the owner, which is not the owner, he was the president of the Washington football team, was a good friend of John Gruden, had been sending emails back and forth for about 11 years now. They went up until about 3 years ago when Bruce Allen was fired. But it's one of those things, it was done and gone 11 years ago. Another thing that I'd say about this is, I don't condone any of this. It's certainly examples of where things come back to bite you. I'm not saying what he did was right by any means. But the fact that something from 11 years ago in an investigation that had nothing to do with him comes up is just kind of, again, an example of what we're trying to talk about as far as privacy and those implications on the internet. Again, certainly would not condone what he was saying or did. Some interesting thoughts about it is that at the time when most of this happened, he was not employed by the NFL. And then another kind of dumb idea, I guess, a thought that he used his personal email, but he was sending it to an NFL email address. So obviously they can go back, look at all of that, and go through it. The interesting piece to this is that there are some people that may have an invested reason to kind of flame another coach in that sense. So the owner of the Washington football team is under fire for a lot of other things, and there's some finger pointing going on right now as to how the leak even happened of those emails. Again, the idea that something like this would happen in a private, use air quotes, private conversation is kind of. Another quick example here, Laramie Tunsil, another NFL example. In 2016, he was projected to be the #1 overall draft pick in the NFL. So at this time, still, young 20s or a teenager. Literally the night before the draft, There was a video that was released on his Twitter page of him smoking a bong on a gas mask. So he went from the projected #1 overall pick to number 13, which lost him. I mean, that doesn't sound awful in the grand scheme of things. He's still playing, he's still making millions of dollars. But at the time, he lost an estimated $10 to $12 million just in that pick. So again, the interesting thing was in the conversation was that it was from his Twitter account. There's been a few stories about what happened and how it may have happened, that it was a business associate or somebody else that was promised things, that once he went to the NFL, he had hired an agent and that person was not getting the money that they were promised. So I think it's one of those things that, again, even when there's people that you trust, there's things out there. They had access to his Twitter, and actually releasing it on his own social media was obviously a big deal. The interesting piece about this is that, as they talked about a little bit, that he accepted money from his college coach. Again, don't necessarily condone things, but the way that this happened, he had never done media interviews at college, and then basically right after he was drafted and everything had gone down, for whatever reason, they'd explained a whole bunch of things. Basically, his college coach wasn't there, his family wasn't there, his agent wasn't there. He was basically at the draft alone after all that came out, and was giving media interviews, basically never talking to anybody, never knowing how to kind of address that, and was basically spilling the beans to other things. And again, all of this for something that basically blows up online. Last example here, Justine Sacco. This one's, again, a little different, not necessarily the time frame that it came to pop up later, but this one was, again, just kind of the power of the internet, I guess you could say. So Justine Sacco was a 30-year-old director of corporate communications at IAC, which owns a bunch of different brands. She was on a flight from London to Cape Town, had 170 Twitter followers, and decided to say some stupid stuff. During that 11-hour flight, she decided that she would go to sleep, and when she landed and turned on her phone, it exploded. Basically, she was the #1 worldwide trend on Twitter. There was a hashtag, "When does Justine land?" basically following her to try and flame her. She was fired the next day. She still has a job, has gotten another job, I guess I would say. So again, it's one of those things that it's to a professional athlete, a professional coach, somebody that's done that and made millions of dollars. John Gruden probably never has a career again. He'll ride off into the sunset happily with his millions and have not much issue. Somebody to this extent, though, the other side of that, excuse me, again, has a job, did just fine, and didn't really help herself in any way, shape, or form. But just talking about, again, the power of the internet. Somebody gets a hold of that, a few retweets, it gets to somebody a little more popular, and it's just a wave. There are certainly some conversations about how Twitter justice kind of becomes a terrible word, I guess, in this sense. Some people have compared it to common day lynching, whatever that is. It's an interesting concept, the psychology of it, I guess, when somebody does something bad and kind of the piling on and people losing their jobs and obviously affecting their lives. So, a little bit of story time. And I like gifts, so we'll always have a good gift. So I want to kind of dig into a little bit of what the project idea was, some quick examples of just privacy and what we're looking at, kind of talk about what we're looking at here. So the original project idea, as most terrible ideas that I have, it all started by talking to Grifter. We have plenty of conversations, but we were actually digging through this day, just our random conversation, and looking through some jail photos, some mugshots of a prior coworker. Some interesting conversations, and again, just as we're doing things, we have our conversation, and then ADHD brains take over, terrible ideas ensue. And this all kind of came together in, as you'll see here shortly, a not so great idea that at least started this all. So we as we were scrolling through, we saw some maybe attractive people, some other not so attractive people, and it reminded me of an old site. Hot or Not was, if you don't remember, was you just kind of, were they hot or not? Really, it was I don't know, the original Tinder, but you didn't get to date them afterwards, I guess. And again, so I had been looking for some ideas to do some web scraping, kind of start a project and have something to play with. Without digging in anything, and anybody can go back and look, I'm sure, I have had a mugshot on the internet before. It's not very nice when you're searching for yourself and something like that comes up, the worst part of your life, when you've done other things, right? And you've done successful things, you're gonna go look for a job and somebody searches that and that's the first thing that pops up. We had some conversation around that. This particular individual that we were looking at doesn't have that same. It was pretty bad, I said. So we started coming up with names and what we would call a project to do some web scraping on jail photos and kind of point a spotlight, we'll say, onto some of the issues with mugshots being out there before someone's convicted. Like I said, terrible idea, so please don't judge, right? We did come up with a name. It was it was pretty bad. So hot or rot, we talked about some awful ideas to kind of scrape, pull web pages or pull booking photos, and then take said ad money and possibly put it on someone's books. After that, it was also March, so there were some brackets talked about and some terrible ideas. But basically, pointing a spotlight on some of the privacy implications. Somebody has a bad day, gets arrested, or even falsely arrested. There's been plenty of that, and stuff still lives out there again forever on the internet. So again, we had talked about this, obviously knew that there would be some not so happy people, will you say? So this wasn't necessarily the idea that took hold. But this is kind of what started it, so to let you know. And P.S., it's always grifter. So how did we get to SAINTCON? So forwarding a little bit from that conversation, Neil and I were talking again, and kind of trying to make sure that I could, I wanted to get a project going and force some motivation. So I called our fearless leader, and honestly, because they're pretty awesome, bugged Pope to see if there was still a slot to speak this year, and stuck myself in there for quote-unquote motivation. Anybody ever given a talk before you've done a project and committed yourself and that's how you do it? So then I started to do the research. So starting this year, this conversation that Grifter and I had was probably a year and a half ago. Speaking of Pope, this was right after Black Hat. Give myself a few months to do that. I could at least come up with a proof of concept of what I was trying to do. As I went through and started digging through some jail photos, there was some issues that I ran into. Specifically here in Utah, they changed the laws this year. So there's actually some really good stuff that comes out of this. It kind of threw my project into the dirt, and hot or raw was probably, like I said, a bad idea anyways. But really quick, some of the laws that were changed, and just discuss this really quick in Utah, and there's some other states that have changed some things. So House Bill 228 this year was passed, and it restricted the distribution of jail photos. So more so than just someone's past or worst moment being out there on the internet, there was a publish for pay websites business that was kind of taking off apparently. So basically people, sites would scrape these photos and list them on their own site and then force people to pay them in order to remove them from said site or delete them. That obviously is pretty much just straight extortion, became an issue, so they wanted to change the laws around it. The reason I have the other one listed isn't necessarily anything to do with jail photos. I was doing a whole bunch of reading on this and getting through the bill a little bit. There was concern from media and other people about restricting access to jail photos. So what they did, and kind of as a compromise, and there, House Bill 249 was passed that basically allows you to search the exchange database is what it's called, not that exchange, it's the letter X. But that is a database that the state of Utah uses. Attorneys, anybody in that, attorneys, lawyers, judges have access to this, but you have to pay a monthly fee, and it's pretty expensive. I think it's like a couple $100. But basically, you can search somebody and you can find convictions, speeding tickets, bankruptcies, divorces, everything that we have in the state database on someone. So as kind of a compromise in some ways to the jail photos, companies can, media can still access those. They just have to request them. They're not just posted on a clear text website by a sheriff. So it's at least a little more clean in that sense. But basically, they made them sign a form saying that it wouldn't be published on a publish for pay site. The interesting thing about this, and just a quick side note, again, as I was reading through this a little bit, we don't want people to be extorted. The laws were changed for a reason. There's some interesting stuff there, but there is, in reading through the law and what they did, those sites can still exist. Whether or not they charge people is where it becomes an issue to remove mugshots. In the bill, there's a excerpt that says, so basically, if you're not guilty and there's a mugshot on this site, you can request to remove it. They have to do it within 7 days. You can't be charged anything, otherwise they're held accountable, and there's fines and legal recourse there. However, if you were guilty of that charge on that mugshot, when you request, they only have to take 30 days as opposed to 7, and they can still charge you, just not a fee in an amount greater than $50. So the state made some interesting changes, but they still allowed them to kind of exist, which that's what lobbying exists for, I guess, right? Somebody knew somebody is what that tells me. But I think the contrast there of the two bills, allowing access to Search Exchange, which their other point to that was for vetting people on dating apps or other people that you may meet. In today's day and age, we've heard plenty of stories. You meet some random person and it doesn't necessarily end well. So there are some other states since 2013 apparently that have changed the laws. I read 18 states had changed the laws since 2013. However, I only found 15. Apparently it's not as trivial as you'd think to search different types of laws that way, and obviously the language in all of them is different, what they may be focusing on or hidden in another bill. So that's what I found. There's plenty of others that are wide open. You go look at Alabama and Florida, and it's definitely not pretty. They're still all there. That kind of stuff it still exists. So again, it's out there. Kind of nice to see some of that changed for a privacy sense. All right, so we ran into that speed bump. So we had to get back to more research and development at this point. So to touch on the project again a little bit and what I was trying to do, this was again to force myself back into Python a little bit. I've learned it. I tell people 10 different times, if you use it, don't use it, don't use it. You kind of learn it, go back. I don't use it on a daily basis, haven't needed it that much. In my career, when I've used it, I've learned what I needed to and gone from there. So it's something that I've wanted to kind of get back into and have, not expertise in, but at least a little more proficiency. After finding the issues with the laws and the mugshots being changed, development and kind of still learning Python, if you will, to get into this, it got pretty tight. So talked to actually somebody about possibly coding some of the project for me, helping out there and kind of doing it in a modular state. That didn't necessarily work out, kept doing some more research and found an interesting tool called Octoparse. I'm still going to be building a tool for this, and we'll talk about that again in a second, but I kind of wanted to touch on Octoparse a little bit. It was an interesting tool that I think deserves a little bit of a shout out. So it's basically a web scraping tool for non-technical people and businesses. So I paid, I think, $90 a month for the basic one. You can get it a little cheaper than that, I think, for even less searches or scrapes, if you will. But basically the idea and what they did was they built these templates for web scraping for, let's say, online businesses that are getting reviews or comments and that type of thing. You can schedule those scrapes to happen. They can run from their cloud machines. They can dump the results into an Excel spreadsheet or a database, so you can then obviously manipulate and go through that data as needed. So certainly an interesting tool. And then the other thing that I thought was interesting that they did have was some social media scrapes. So you could go back and pull all the tweets from a certain person. So again, from an employer perspective, it's a pretty cool idea if you're hiring somebody to be able to go back and look at exactly what we're talking about. Octoparse, I think, like I said, deserves a little bit of a shout out there. Was playing with that and trying to get some ideas with that, and Maltego basically to dig into kind of what became the bigger project here. So that bigger project we decided is going to be Cancelbot. So the idea here and terminology or whatever is interesting. The whole cancel culture is kind of what I'm talking about. Again, I don't condone, don't agree with a lot of the things that the examples that I gave, and there's plenty of people out there that deserve to be canceled, if you will. There's a lot of issues, though, with other people that, again, when the Twitter mob, the internet mob come up and somebody's past, let it be the past, I'd say. If I was a teenager and had the internet and cell phones the way that people do these days, it would probably not be a good thing for me either. We all learn, we learn from our mistakes and hopefully grow. So the idea here wouldn't be to build a tool that would go find those things to then create the Twitter mob or flame anybody. It would be more of an idea to see what you have that's out there publicly that you can go through and dig into your own public presence. There's some other ideas that, again, I'll talk about in talking to some other people about this project that kind of came up that I think will be great to kind of go with this. But what's the idea and kind of the base idea of Cancelbot? So I'd like to be able to provide target information, name, email, phone number, any combination of that, and then have it pull and provide back public profiles off of common social media. LinkedIn, GitHub even sometimes, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, the obvious ones. Once we do that, we can go through and find public posts. Now, in some cases, this is going to be an issue, obviously, from a public perspective. I'll dig into it a little bit and see what we can get if you're logged in, have an account, and dig in a little bit deeper on anybody. But a lot of times, if you've sanitized your public presence, that's hopefully not there, just in searches. Once we pull those posts, we can search all existing posts for given keywords or phrases. That's not necessarily going to cut it in a lot of cases. I've thought about some other ideas, whether it's natural language processing or anything else. Again, just some ideas to play with some projects and technology here to get some other things going. An idea that I had there, though, is we could also ask Microsoft for their racist Twitter bot that was also already pretty apt in talking in a racist tone and understanding what that would look like. That was an interesting concept of what AI can do and what the internet can do to it. So again, an interesting story there, but if there was something that could genuinely do some natural language processing to kind of review those old posts. Again, some of the other stuff that I was doing already was digging into Maltego and some other OSINT tools as far as what those would look like. The transforms for the Maltego social media stuff are a lot of times cost prohibitive and require subscriptions, so there was a little bit of limitation there in digging into just social media. So digging into other OSINT tools and some other possibilities there are certainly some of the ideas here. And then some of that other work that I was talking about, some ideas that have kind of come from Cancelbot and talking to other people and starting to work on this a little bit. So a few weeks ago I was talking to my therapist. It's 2021, we should all be doing that anyways. And she actually had some interesting ideas in telling her what I was talking about. She said that she has clients and such that are abuse, stalking issues, anything else like that maybe exes are pulling things online, or in a lot of cases the things that she described were likely just bad password use and shared passwords that you used with an ex that they knew how to get into accounts and do other things from there. But again, some ideas on how to help protect yourself for quote-unquote muggle or non-technical person, other people. An idea from that, again, I'll touch on a little bit. Kids, again, having 13-year-old boys starting to talk about social media, it's certainly a conversation to see what that looks like. Trafficking and exploitation keywords. So again, searching and helping find anybody else that's in issues that they use those tools to find trafficking victims anyway. So if we could use that and automate anything to help those people that search for exploited people, that'd be awesome as well. So there's common places that they search, common keywords, stuff like that. If you could provide that, let it help kind of go through that would be a great idea. Then again, what my therapist had talked about, she talked about providing some of this information. So I talked about maybe doing a video or a blog post to some of that, kind of help provide a sanitization, if you will, of your online presence and helping other people kind of understand what that looks like. Again, if we put this into a web tool and let them search for their own presence and see what they find, this could certainly, as anything in our industry, be used in a bad way if somebody wanted to. But again, to be able to provide that to people that don't necessarily know how to do all this or couldn't easily search all the info is kind of what we're going for. And then lastly, again, info for parents, teenagers, anything else that we can do to help that way. Again, providing information into what their public presence looks like, seeing if there's anything that they're missing, if you will, back to the exploitation and trafficking from a teenage level and what that becomes. There's some terrible stories there that I've heard and won't necessarily dig into, but anything that we can do to help. These are some ideas that I've kind of gotten as I've been digging through this. Don't necessarily have anything technical thanks to timelines, and we will be digging in and having a lot more conversation here shortly about what that will look like. But for now, that's what I've got and kind of what I've dug through. So, any questions? Of course. Mm-hmm. So the question is the publish for pay sites and the states that have outlawed that, and if it covers the other states. So everything that I've read, the laws don't apply in those states, so they're still charging if people want to remove that. So obviously, again, it's a full exploitation. Like you're just exploiting people at that point, but it's definitely an issue elsewhere in the country at this point. So I wouldn't say that we're always the first to do good things, but we're one of the first this time. Awesome. Thanks, guys.